You know, the humanitarian landscape has changed enormously, and I think it's really important to look at the statistic that in the past decade, we've gone from 80% of our global humanitarian assistance going to victims of natural disasters to the flip that now 80% goes to victims of violent conflict. There's been a lot of good work, I think very effective work, on disaster risk reduction, on early warnings in the event of tornadoes or tsunamis, and working with local communities so they are more resilient, they are more prepared in the case of those natural disasters. We now need to bring a whole different set of lenses to tackling the root drivers of violent conflict and understand that these are not fundamentally humanitarian solutions, and think differently about how our humanitarian action is aligned with, contributes to both looking at the drivers of those conflicts and also addressing the solutions to those conflicts. The concept of neutrality has been at the heart of a lot of conversations for several decades. And I will note that very deliberately the NGO Red Crescent Red Cross Code of Conduct does not use the word neutral, they use the word impartial. There are only a few organizations that actually have a mandate of neutrality. ICRC, I think MSF adheres very closely to that. As the landscape has shifted to greater numbers of violent conflict driving humanitarian need, we do need to think about how our humanitarian action needs to change, that we're not just contributing to war economies. We have that challenge going on right now in South Sudan. 20 years of the Operation Lifeline Sudan taught us that there are ways in which you can save lives, but you can prolong conflict. And this is, I think, the paramount challenge. The lens that we now need to bring to bear is understanding conflict dynamics and have much greater attention to understanding how you can't truly be neutral. If you are someone coming from outside a culture and bringing assistance or doing programs, that's not neutral. It can be impartial, but there are also opportunities and requirements to think about how you are or are not contributing to the conflict dynamics. We're seeing a huge correlation between countries that are fragile, where they have a frayed relationship between the state and the society. Governments are weak, they're repressive, people don't trust their governments. Those are the countries that are falling into civil war, that erupt in the kind of violence that results in refugees, in internal displacement, and in the kind of humanitarian suffering that we're seeing. So we need to understand those fragility factors and look at all the tools that we have, humanitarian assistance, development, security, and think in a more comprehensive way about how to get upstream from the kind of conflicts that are driving an extraordinary humanitarian burden right now. The ground game that a lot of humanitarians play is, I think, an essential part of the picture. They get and understand what's going on in a very real and granular level, and usually outside of the capital city. We need to harvest that and bring it forward. Building peace is no longer just happening at the diplomatic or at the state level. It requires ground-up action. It requires really understanding what's happening at the local level. Those aid workers who understand the community, who have been there, they get the dynamics, they often have a very important understanding of what's going on. Part of what we need to do is to connect that up to what's happening nationally and what's happening internationally. And when we're able to bring that information together and apply it to building peace from the ground up and connect it to what's happening in the top down, is when we have the greatest opportunity for building a more enduring peace and getting ahead of conflict.